Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome to another deep dive. We are really thrilled to have you with us today because we're looking at a stack of reporting that presents just this truly mind-bending contrast.
Yeah, it really is.
I mean, I want you to picture this. On one hand, astronomers are discovering that the absolute emptiest, darkest, most desolate parts of the universe might actually be the very things tearing the cosmos apart.
Right.
And on the other hand, down here on Earth, our own planet is feeling incredibly small, fragile, and just hyper-connected.
Hyperconnected is definitely the word.
We're seeing geopolitical shockwaves originating from the Middle East that are quite literally rippling into your local gas stations, altering the global financial markets, impacting the technology in your pocket, and even shaking up international sports.
It's profound dichotomy. You have the macro level mysteries of infinite space expanding, and then the micro level realities of humanity colliding in increasingly volatile ways.
Absolutely. So our mission for you today is to connect those dots. We're going to map out the breaking scientific discoveries of the week, unpack the major global conflicts dominating the headlines, and reveal the hidden economic forces shaping your everyday life.
And, looking at the news this week, it can feel a little heavy.
Yeah, it definitely can. But we're going to balance the intense global updates with some awe-inspiring science. And by the end of this deep dive, we're even going to find some comedic relief in the completely absurd alternate reality economics of professional sports.
I am definitely looking forward to the sports economics. The numbers being thrown around this week are just staggering.
They really are. Before we jump in, though, we have a rule here. Since we're covering massive global news, we need to establish our terms early.
Right, the acronym rule. So when we say AI today, we mean artificial intelligence. And when we talk about NASA, we are referring to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
Perfect. So let's start out in the cosmos, looking at the mind and the future of learning. We have a fascinating piece from Science Daily about cosmic voids. Now, when you picture outer space, you probably picture planets, stars, galaxies, and then just exactly nothing. Huge expanses of absolute nothingness. These are called cosmic voids, and they can be tens to hundreds of megaparsecs wide.
Which is an unimaginably large distance.
Right. But the breakthrough here is that these voids are not actually empty.
And that completely challenges our fundamental human intuition about what nothingness actually is.
Yeah.
In physics, a true vacuum doesn't really exist.
Wait, it doesn't?
No, not really. These cosmic voids, despite lacking galaxies and stars, they harbor underlying quantum fields. And these quantum fields create a measurable form of energy known as vacuum energy, which we actually more commonly refer to as dark energy.
Okay, so if this dark energy exists everywhere in space, why are we only focusing on these massive empty voids? Does the energy behave differently out there?
That is the crucial distinction, yeah. In populated areas of the universe, like our own galaxy, where there is an immense amount of matter, the gravitational pull of all that mass essentially mutes or counteracts the vacuum energy.
Because gravity is holding things together locally?
Exactly. Gravity is the dominant force there. But in these massive cosmic voids, there's almost no matter.
Right.
So because there's no gravitational anchor to mute it, this vacuum energy becomes the dominant unchecked force.
I want to use an analogy here to help visualize this because it totally flipped my understanding of the universe when I read it.
Let's hear it.
Think of the universe like a giant loaf of bread rising in the oven. The galaxies are like the raisins in the dough. For a long time, the common perception was that the dough itself was just expanding outward, carrying the raisins along for the ride.
Right, just passive expansion.
But what this research suggests is that the air bubbles inside the dough, the cosmic voids, are actually generating pressure. The empty spaces themselves are the engines pushing the dough apart.
That's a great way to put it.
So this pressure from the voids is what's driving the accelerated expansion of the entire universe.
It is a massive paradigm shift for cosmology. I mean, voids were first identified in the late 1970s, and for decades we viewed them as passive, empty real estate. Just dead space between the interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Now we have to view them as active engines of cosmic expansion. It challenges the older, highly static models of dark energy. The universe isn't just passively drifting apart from some initial momentum.
It is actively being pushed apart from the inside out by its own empty spaces.
Exactly.
It's wild to think about. And speaking of venturing out into those massive spaces, let's bring it a little closer to home, to our own solar system. We have reports from space.com regarding some major shakeups in the Artemis program run by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
NASA, right?
Right. They've just selected a new upper stage for the Space Launch System, the SLS moon rocket. This engineering upgrade is designed to improve fuel efficiency and payload capacity for upcoming lunar missions and eventually the highly anticipated missions to Mars.
But getting the hardware right is really only half the battle. There is an entirely separate group focusing strictly on the human element.
And that would be the Human Factors Technical Development Team, or the PDT.
Right. And they are grappling with a terrifying question. How do you manage the human mind when it's millions of miles away from home in an environment that is actively trying to kill you?
Yeah.
The TDT is fundamentally rethinking the crew sizes for future Mars missions.
Oh.
Because when you go to Mars, you are facing unprecedented communication delays with Earth.
I was trying to wrap my head around that delay. I think of the cognitive load on a submarine commander deep underwater. They're running a highly complex machine, responding to crises, but they are completely cut off from central command. If something goes wrong, they can't just pick up the phone.
No, they can't.
On a Mars mission, you are looking at up to a 20-minute communication delay each way. If a life support system starts failing, you send a message to Houston and you have to wait 40 minutes just to get a reply.
And in a lethal environment, 40 minutes is a lifetime. You cannot rely on mission control for immediate tech support or crisis management.
You're on your own.
Completely. The crew has to be entirely flawlessly self-reliant. The TDT is using highly detailed computational models to analyze the mental workload and stress levels of astronauts under these specific conditions.
And what did they find?
They've realized that the cognitive burden of managing planned daily scientific tasks, maintaining the spacecraft, and crucially, handling unplanned emergencies in total isolation is simply too high for a small crew of 4.
So the answer is just sending more people.
It's not just about having more hands on deck to turn wrenches. It's about distributing the cognitive and psychological load so that no single astronaut is pushed past their breaking point.
That makes sense.
If you have a small crew and one person gets sick or has a mental health crisis, the entire mission profile collapses. The conclusion is that they need significantly larger crews to build in psychological redundancy.
Human resilience is officially becoming the most critical engineering parameter of the entire Mars architecture.
It really is.
It highlights how advanced technology and basic human psychology are completely intertwined, which actually leads us perfectly into our next story from TechCrunch. OpenAI has just updated ChatGPT, but this update isn't just about the system writing better emails or summarizing text faster.
No, this is much bigger.
They have introduced dynamic, interactive, visual explanations specifically for math and science concepts.
This represents a significant leap in how we utilize these artificial intelligence tools. Let's say you're a student trying to understand a geometric concept like the Pythagorean theorem.
Okay.
Previously, a chatbot would just give you the text formula, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and maybe a static generated image of a triangle. It was essentially a digital textbook.
Right, just a wall of text.
Now, the system generates an interactive coded interface. You can manipulate the variables in real time. You grab your mouse, drag a slider to change the length of one side of the triangle, and the visualization instantly adjusts to show you how the hypotenuse changes.
Wow.
It updates the underlying math right before your eyes.
That seems like a massive shift in pedagogy. We're moving away from an era where a machine just spits out a final answer for you to memorize. The machine is evolving into an active, responsive learning partner. You are experimenting with the math, not just reading it.
And that taps into a fundamental aspect of human neurobiology. We are inherently visual and spatial learners. When you can manipulate an abstract mathematical concept with your hands, even if it is a digital slider on a screen, it engages entirely different neural pathways in the brain compared to rote memorization.
It builds intuition.
Exactly. It builds an intuitive understanding of the mechanics of the math, rather than just surface-level recall.
Which brings up a really interesting point about how our brains process and retain information over a lifetime. We found a fascinating piece from Popular Mechanics about a group of people researchers are calling superagers.
I love this study.
These are individuals over the age of 80 who possess the cognitive abilities, the sharp memory, the rapid reasoning, the quick vocabulary recall of people in their 40s or 50s. They are actively defying what the medical community previously thought was the inevitable cognitive decline of aging.
The underlying biology of these superagers is remarkable to look at. When researchers map their brains using advanced high-resolution neuroimaging, they find two very distinct biological advantages.
What are they?
First, they have exceptionally high levels of neurogenesis, that is, the generation of brand new neurons. And this is happening specifically in the hippocampus, which acts as the brain's primary memory center.
Okay, and the second?
Second, they possess a much denser, thicker, and more active prefrontal cortex, which is the region responsible for higher-level executive function, complex problem-solving, and emotional regulation.
I always assumed that cognitive decline was essentially a genetic lottery. You either get lucky or you don't. But looking at these superagers, is it possible we've been underestimating the impact of lifestyle on brain density? Why do their brains look like this?
It's an incredibly intricate combination of both genetic luck and rigorous lifestyle choices. On the genetic side, yes, researchers are looking very closely at variations in the APOE gene, or apolipoprotein.
APOE, right.
Certain alleles of this specific gene seem to offer a robust biological shield against the protein buildups associated with Alzheimer's disease and general cognitive decline. But the genetics only provide the foundation. The lifestyle is what actually builds the house.
So what are these superagers doing differently on a daily basis?
They consistently share a few behavioral traits. First, they engage in highly enriching, difficult mental activities. They aren't just doing the same crossword puzzle they've done for 20 years.
Right, they're not coasting.
No, they are constantly forcing their brains to learn completely new, frustratingly difficult skills. Second, they maintain incredibly strong, active social connections, which requires constant emotional and cognitive processing.
Because talking to people takes work.
It really does.
Yeah.
And third, they are physically active, which ensures high blood flow to that dense prefrontal cortex. This combination of a genetic predisposition and a relentlessly demanding mental and physical lifestyle creates this powerful neurological resilience.
Let's step away from the incredible resilience of the human mind for a moment.
Yeah.
We need to look at the current state of global geopolitics, because right now we are seeing a profound fragility on the world stage.
Yep.
We're going to look at a synthesis of reporting from NPR, France 24, and the BBC regarding the Middle East.
It's a stark transition, but a deeply necessary one to understand the geopolitical forces currently shaping the globe.
As of this recording, the situation is escalating rapidly. We are on day 10 of an intensely expanding conflict involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran. The human toll is mounting. The U.S. Department of Defense has officially confirmed that a 7th American soldier has died while serving in the region.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the geography of the war is widening. Israeli airstrikes have heavily pounded southern Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, explicitly targeting Hezbollah infrastructure. The bombardments in that densely populated Oban area are so intense that over 100,000 people were displaced from their homes in a single 24-hour period.
To really understand the gravity of this, we need to map out the strategic implications. This is not a localized border dispute. You have strikes occurring deep inside Iran, and simultaneously, heavy bombardments across the border in Lebanon.
Right.
Hezbollah is a heavily armed political and military proxy of Iran. By striking targets in both Lebanon and Iran simultaneously, the conflict is stretching aggressively across multiple sovereign borders.
So it's spreading out fast.
The immediate strategic risk here is a geopolitical chain reaction. The more widespread the military operations become, the higher the likelihood of drawing neighboring nations. Each entangled in their own complex web of alliances and mutual defense packs into a much broader, uncontrollable regional war.
And the human cost is staggering.
Exactly. On the humanitarian side, suddenly having 100,000 people displaced in a single day creates a catastrophic, immediate crisis regarding shelter, clean water, and medical care. It severely destabilizes the civilian infrastructure of the entire surrounding area.
And within the extreme chaos of this war, we're seeing deeply conflicting narratives emerge regarding civilian casualties. We want to present this to you impartially, pulling from multiple international sources.
Right.
We're looking at reports from RT and News Americas now concerning a devastating incident in Minab, Iran. An elementary school was destroyed, resulting in the reported deaths of over 160 children.
It is an unfathomable tragedy. And in these situations, it's crucial that we rigorously present the multiple perspectives surrounding the event.
What are those perspectives?
On one side, The U.S. administration in Washington strictly and categorically denies any responsibility for the bombing of the school. They maintain a firm stance that their military operations are exclusively targeted at specific, verified military infrastructure.
And the other side.
Conversely, we are seeing extensive reports and claims from outlets like RT suggesting that the strike was the result of a U.S. Tomahawk cruise missile that mistakenly veered off course and missed its intended target, which they claim was an Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, facility located nearby.
It's a classic fog of war scenario where the official narratives are completely at odds, and we are simply navigating a highly charged information space to bring you the claims exactly as they exist in the reporting.
And if we look at the broader tragic context of modern warfare, the situation heavily mirrors historical patterns.
How so?
In modern conflicts fought in densely populated areas, when horrific civilian casualties occur, the immediate aftermath is almost always marked by absolute official denials and fiercely conflicting narratives from the opposing militaries.
It's just chaos at first.
Exactly. Historically speaking, it is usually only after the dust settles, sometimes months or years later, following prolonged international or internal military investigations, that the mechanical realities of what actually happened are brought to light.
The actual evidence.
Right. Whether it was a tragic ballistic miscalculation, a weapon malfunction, or deeply flawed intelligence, those details rarely emerge in the first 48 hours. The immediate reality is always a war of competing narratives.
Which brings up the question of how these specific wars are actually being fought on a tactical level. The technology of modern warfare is shifting at an alarming rate.
It really is.
According to reporting from the New York Times, Ukraine is now stepping in to directly assist U.S. military bases located in the Middle East. They are deploying advanced artificial intelligence-powered anti-drone systems that have been rigorously combat-tested in the skies over Ukraine to intercept Iranian Shahed drones that are currently targeting U.S. positions.
This is a fascinating yet grim geopolitical overlap. You're seeing the real-time technological lessons learned from the grueling conflict in Eastern Europe being packaged, exported, and directly applied to a completely different theater of war in the Middle East.
How do the AI systems work better than traditional ones?
These systems use machine learning algorithms to instantly recognize the specific flight patterns, thermal signatures, and acoustic profiles of these Iranian drones, allowing defense batteries to shoot them down much more efficiently than human operators alone.
But the use of deadly drones is no longer just confined to traditional, recognized war zones with uniformed militaries.
No, it's spreading.
If we pivot our focus to the Caribbean, a report from News Americas now highlights a terrifying deterioration of security in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. Human Rights Watch is issuing severe international warnings that the capital city is effectively becoming a drone war zone.
Yeah, that report is alarming.
Various armed factions, reportedly acting in collaboration with private military contractors, specifically naming a company called Vectis Global, are extensively using explosive-laden drones in highly dense, impoverished urban neighborhoods. The reporting states that since 2025, over 1,200 people have died from these drone strikes in Haiti, including dozens of children.
What is vital to understand here is the rapid democratization of airspace and drone warfare. A decade ago, advanced lethal drone strike capability was the exclusive, highly guarded domain of a few superpower militaries.
It costs billions.
Exactly, it required billions of dollars in infrastructure. Today, relatively cheap, off-the-shelf commercial drones can be easily modified with explosive payloads by non-state actors, private security contractors, or local armed groups.
And when you deploy that kind of improvised technology in a dense urban environment like Port-au-Prince, Haiti, the danger to the average civilian walking down the street must increase exponentially.
Precisely. The theoretical precision of the weapon becomes completely irrelevant if it's detonated in a crowded market or a residential neighborhood. It fundamentally alters the basic security landscape of a city.
Because it's coming from above.
It essentially turns the sky itself into a constant, unpredictable, and lethal threat for the people trying to live below. There are no front lines anymore. The threat is three-dimensional.
It's a terrifying reality for those civilians. And while the technology of war accelerates and spreads globally, the high-level diplomatic efforts to actually stop the fighting seem entirely gridlocked by major leadership shifts.
Yeah, the diplomacy is stalling.
According to Reuters and the AP, Iran has officially named Mujtaba Khamenei as their new supreme leader following the transition of power. The capital is seeing massive, organized rallies by hardliners in support of him. Furthermore, Russian President Vladimir Putin has immediately pledged his firm support and cooperation to the new Iranian leadership.
This rapid consolidation of hardline power within Iran drastically reduces the likelihood of any near-term diplomatic concessions or de-escalation with the West. To give you a clear perspective on the diplomatic rhetoric currently being deployed, RT published an extensive interview with Abdul Majid Hakimilahi, who serves as Iran's representative in India.
Okay.
His viewpoint frames the entire conflict in stark anti-Western existential terms.
How exactly is he framing it to the international community?
He claims that the United States is fighting a desperate war to maintain a unipolar world order against rising independent multipolar nations. More pointedly, he dismisses the current military escalation as a strategic necessity, and instead frames it to his audience as a personal, politically motivated vendetta being driven aggressively by U.S. President Donald Trump and the Israeli Prime Minister.
So making it about specific leaders rather than nations.
Exactly. By framing the war as a personal attack against Iranian sovereignty by specific Western leaders, it galvanizes domestic support and makes any compromise look like a capitulation to foreign imperialism.
And if we look across the Mediterranean at the European response to all of this, the diplomatic gridlock is just as fraught. The European Union Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, is using this Middle Eastern crisis to aggressively push for a highly militarized European security doctrine.
She is pushing hard for that, yes.
She's arguing that Europe can no longer rely purely on economic soft power. They must project hard military power much more assertively on the global stage.
She is making that push, but she is facing intense, multi-directional political blowback from within the EU. Critics are attacking her strategy on two very distinct fronts.
What's the first one?
First, member states are criticizing her office for a highly bureaucratic, delayed, and disjointed response to the unfolding humanitarian crisis.
And the second?
Second, and perhaps more fundamentally, she is facing severe criticism from various left-wing and centrist political factions for failing to directly and forcefully condemn the U.S.-Israeli strikes in Lebanon and Iran. This has sparked a massive internal structural debate about what the EU's actual foreign policy direction should be.
So Europe is divided on how to act.
Completely. Should they unconditionally align with U.S. military actions, or should they forge an independent foreign policy strictly rooted in international humanitarian norms? The diplomatic channels within Europe aren't just stalled. They're actively fracturing under the pressure.
And when international diplomacy fractures, the global economy usually shatters right behind it. Let's move into the economic shockwaves of this conflict. Because if you've driven past a gas station anywhere this week, you already know exactly what we are talking about.
Oh yeah, you felt it.
Based on a culmination of financial reporting from the New York Times, RT, and DW, global markets are sliding into the red, and the price of crude oil has officially spiked well over $100 a barrel. Here in the U.S., gasoline prices at the pump are up 17% since this conflict escalated. The national average just hit $3.48 a gallon, and out in places like California, USA, it has surged well over $5 a gallon, putting an immediate squeeze on household budgets.
The underlying reason for this massive sudden price spike comes down to a very specific, highly vulnerable geographic choke point, the Strait of Hormuz.
Which is where?
This narrow waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman is the vital artery for roughly 1/3 of the world's entire seaborne oil exports. Due to the military strikes and drone activity we just discussed, major commercial shipping and insurance companies are terrified. Traffic through the strait is down a staggering 80%.
80%. Wow.
Ships are simply refusing to enter the zone. Furthermore, Russian President Putin has publicly warned the global market that if the military instability continues, Gulf oil production that is wholly dependent on the strait could face a complete systemic halt within a matter of weeks. The sheer market terror of that supply evaporating overnight is what is driving the speculative price above $100 a barrel.
The global political reactions to this economic squeeze are fascinating to watch. You have a country like Hungary practically begging the European Union to lift the established bans on Russian oil just so they can keep their domestic economy running and their factories open.
Right.
Meanwhile, the U.S. administration in Washington is actively trying to navigate easing certain international sanctions to try and pump more oil into the global market to artificially stabilize these spiraling prices. But looking at the financial markets, there's something really strange happening.
What's that?
Normally, when a major regional war breaks out and global inflation fears skyrocket due to oil prices, you would expect the price of gold to absolutely surge, right? Gold is the ultimate historical safe haven asset during wartime.
Exactly. That is the traditional century-old economic playbook.
Hmm.
Investors panic, they flee volatile stocks, and they buy solid gold. But according to deep financial analysis from RT, we are currently witnessing a highly bizarre market anomaly.
Yeah, I saw this.
Gold is actually facing intense, forced liquidations. The price is struggling to gain traction because of a massive liquidity crisis happening behind the scenes at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, or CME.
Okay, I want to really dig into the mechanics of this because to the average person, it sounds totally counterintuitive. Why would massive institutional investors sell off their safest asset during a war?
It all comes down to the brutal reality of margin calls. Institutional traders and massive hedge funds are holding massive, highly leveraged positions in the oil market.
So they're betting on oil with borrowed money.
Right. As the price of oil goes completely haywire and volatile, the CME, which regulates these trades, requires those traders to put up significantly more cash as collateral to cover the increased risk of their oil bets going bad. They officially raised the margin requirements on oil. But because the market moves so fast, many of these traders don't have billions in spare cash just sitting around.
So if I'm holding gold and I get hit with a massive margin call on my oil trades, I'm essentially forced to liquidate my good assets to cover my bad bets.
Precisely. They are forced to sell off their highly liquid, profitable, safe assets, like their gold portfolios, just to generate the immediate cash needed to cover their massive margin requirements in the chaotic oil market. They are draining their safe havens just to stay financially afloat.
That's incredible.
And the situation got so tense that the CME actually had to intervene. They lowered the margin requirements for trading gold and silver, making it cheaper to hold those contracts. They are essentially trying to use the precious metals market as a financial pressure valve to prevent a total catastrophic liquidity freeze across the entire exchange. It is a highly precarious, high-wire balancing act by the financial regulators.
It's incredible how interconnected it all is. A drone strike in the Middle East forces a trader in Chicago to sell gold, which shifts the global price of a commodity. But before we leave the economy, I do want to point out a fascinating silver lining we found in a report from DW.
We could use a silver lining.
Not every country is panicking about the price of oil right now. Nations that have heavily, systematically invested in renewable energy infrastructure over the last decade, places like Uruguay and Denmark, are almost entirely insulated from these massive oil price spikes. Their economies are humming along relatively undisturbed.
And this is perhaps one of the most critical long-term geopolitical takeaways for the listener. The global transition to green energy, wind, solar, geothermal grids is no longer just a conversation restricted to climate change mitigation and environmentalism. It has fundamentally evolved into a hard matter of national security and domestic economic resilience.
Right.
When a nation generates the vast majority of its own baseline power from the wind and sun within its own borders, a sudden geopolitical crisis halfway across the world cannot arbitrarily double the cost of heating homes, running factories, or fueling public transit in that country. Energy independence through renewables is functioning as literal geopolitical armor against global volatility.
Geopolitical armor. It is a powerful way to reframe the entire energy debate. And speaking of how governments protect or fail to protect their own people, let's move into our next segment. We are looking at authoritarianism, accountability, and the mechanics of dissent.
This is a crucial topic.
Let's start in South America. We have a deeply concerning, detailed report from Inside Climate News about the current situation in Ecuador. The administration of President Daniel Noboa is aggressively cracking down on environmental defenders. But they aren't using traditional, visible methods like throwing them in jail or breaking up protests with police. They are weaponizing the national financial system against them.
It is a highly modern, incredibly insidious, and ruthlessly efficient form of bureaucratic repression. The government is specifically targeting prominent activists who actively oppose the expansion of large-scale mining operations in the sensitive Amazon rainforest regions.
Like who?
Leaders like Andres Tapia of the indigenous Quechua community. What the Noboa administration is doing is utilizing highly stringent post-9/11 style anti-terrorism banking regulations. They use these laws to legally force major domestic banks like Banco Pichincha to completely freeze the bank accounts and assets of these environmental organizations. and their individual leaders.
Why use the banks instead of the police? What makes this tactic so effective for an administration trying to silence opposition?
Because it's clean, it's quiet, and it creates no visible martyrs. If you arrest a prominent indigenous leader, you risk sparking massive international outrage, protests in the streets, and condemnation from human rights groups.
It's bad PR.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you simply freeze their bank account under the guise of financial regulatory compliance, it barely makes the evening news. Yet the paralyzing effect is absolute. If an organization's accounts are frozen, they cannot pay their legal staff, they cannot receive international donations, the leaders cannot pay their rent or buy groceries for their families. It's a strategy of bureaucratic starvation. You entirely paralyze a movement's ability to operate in modern society without ever having to fire a shot or hold a highly publicized trial.
You literally just turn off their ability to participate in the economy. It is chilling. And we are seeing similar, though significantly more aggressive and international, tactics of transnational repression happening in Nicaragua.
Yes.
According to a comprehensive report from Latin America Reports, which cites extensive findings from the United Nations Human Rights Office, the regime led by President Daniel Ortega and Vice President Rosario Murillo isn't just silencing people inside their own borders anymore. They are actively hunting and harassing them globally.
The granular details in this UN report are highly alarming. The Nicaraguan government is actually diverting public welfare funds state money that is legally earmarked to alleviate poverty and assist vulnerable citizens, and they are secretly channeling those funds to finance sophisticated international spy networks.
That's awful.
These networks are tasked with monitoring, legally harassing, and socially repressing political opposition figures, journalists, and activists who have already fled the country and are living in exile abroad.
But the report highlights one specific tactic that seems almost unimaginably cruel. They aren't just spying on them, they are erasing their legal identities.
Yes. The most severe and legally complex tactic the Ortega-Murillo regime is employing is the mass, arbitrary revocation of nationality. Through rubber-stamped judicial decrees, they are legally stripping hundreds of exiled human rights defenders, prominent journalists, and political rivals of their Nicaraguan citizenship. This bureaucratic action renders these individuals completely stateless under international law.
How does someone even function in the modern world if they are legally stateless?
With extreme daily difficulty. To be stateless means you belong to no recognized government. You have no valid passport, meaning you cannot cross borders or travel. You often lose the legal right to work, open a bank account, or sign a lease in your host country. You have absolutely no consular protection if you are wronged. It is a deliberate, calculated attempt by a regime to entirely erase a person's legal existence and agency on the global stage, punishing them permanently for their political dissent.
It is a terrifying abuse of state sovereignty, but occasionally the international legal community does attempt to push back and demand accountability. Al Jazeera is reporting extensively on a developing situation involving the International Criminal Court, or the ICC, based in The Hague, Netherlands.
Right.
The court is currently actively evaluating the incredibly deadly years-long anti-drug campaign that was waged by former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte. During his tenure, thousands of people, mostly from impoverished urban areas, including children, were killed in extrajudicial police operations without trials.
The situation unfolding in the Philippines right now presents a massive, incredibly delicate geopolitical tightrope for the current president, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. He is caught between two powerful, opposing forces. On the international stage, he is facing immense pressure from human rights organizations, the UN, and the victims' families to fully cooperate with the ICC's investigation into potential crimes against humanity.
Because if he doesn't cooperate,
To refuse cooperation damages the Philippines' standing in the international community and deters foreign investment.
but domestically, he relies on the very people the ICC wants to investigate.
Exactly. On the domestic front, the National Police Force and Duterte's deeply entrenched political allies still hold significant, formidable power within the government and society. They aggressively demand total amnesty and impunity for the drug war operations.
So what does he do?
For Marcos Jr., formally outsourcing justice to a foreign international court is a massive, potentially destabilizing domestic political risk. It could fracture his political coalition. But conversely, actively blocking the ICC firmly cements a horrific culture of violent impunity and lack of accountability within his own borders. There is no easy political off-ramp for his administration.
It is a brutal political calculus, but sometimes the most effective push for accountability and the loudest voice of dissent doesn't happen in a courtroom in The Hague. It happens in front of millions of people on a sports pitch.
This is a very powerful story.
According to the BBC, 5 Iranian women's soccer players have officially defected from their national team. They are currently hiding in a secure safe house in Australia. This entire ordeal started because they bravely and publicly refused to salute the Iranian national anthem during a match at the Asian Cup. It was a silent, powerful protest against the regime's ongoing human rights abuses and the treatment of women.
It is a profound, life-altering act of courage. These athletes were immediately labeled wartime traitors by hardline critics and state media back home. They engaged in this protest knowing full well the severe, potentially lethal danger they and their families would face upon returning to Iran. What this profoundly illustrates is how international sports frequently transcend mere athletic entertainment to become the most visible, high-stakes global stage for political defiance.
Why is sports such a potent platform for this kind of protest?
Because of the captive global audience, authoritarian regimes rely heavily on tightly controlling domestic media and information flows. But when an athlete uses their platform in a live international broadcast to stage a protest, even a silent one, it instantly pierces through state censorship in a way that very few other political actions can. Millions of people see it simultaneously before the feed can be cut. It forces the international community to witness the dissent.
And we are seeing that international reaction right now. Their cause has garnered massive global attention. Even U.S. President Donald Trump publicly voiced his support for their asylum application to remain safely in Australia. It just goes to show you how a fleeting moment of silent protest on a soccer field can ripple up to the absolute highest levels of global diplomacy and statecraft.
It is a testament to the enduring power of visible public defiance.
All right, as promised at the top of the show, we are going to transition into our final segment: society, health, and the truly alternate reality of sports economics. Let's start with some critical, highly actionable health news pulled from the Washington Post and Reuters. March is officially Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month, and epidemiologists are tracking a deeply alarming, accelerating trend right now.
The numbers are concerning.
The rates of colorectal cancer in people under the age of 50 are absolutely skyrocketing across the board.
The medical statistics being reported are deeply sobering. Nearly half of all new colorectal cancer cases are now occurring in younger patients, people in their 30s and 40s. Furthermore, a full third of these new cases are manifesting specifically in the rectum. This represents a massive unexplained demographic shift from what the oncology community is historically used to seeing, where this was almost exclusively viewed as a disease of the elderly.
So what is the actionable insight for the listener here? For years, the standard accepted medical advice was that you didn't really need to worry about scheduling a colonoscopy or getting screened until you hit age 45 or 50.
Right.
But because the data is shifting so aggressively, that advice is changing rapidly. Leading medical experts and oncologists are now aggressively pushing the message that if you have any family history whatsoever, or if you are experiencing any abnormal digestive symptoms, you cannot wait. You need to actively advocate for yourself with your doctor and get screened much earlier than the traditionally recommended age. It is a highly proactive step that is quite literally saving lives in younger demographics.
And while individual patients are forced to fight for their own health outcomes, they are increasingly having to fight the massive corporate structures that manage their healthcare access. A federal judge has just issued a massive landmark ruling allowing current and former employees of JPMorgan Chase to officially move forward with a sweeping class action lawsuit against the bank.
What's the basis of the lawsuit?
The core allegation from the employees is that the bank severely, and perhaps willfully, mismanaged their employer-sponsored health and prescription benefit programs.
How does a bank mismanage a health plan? What are the employees actually claiming?
They are alleging that JPMorgan Chase negotiated highly unfavorable contracts with pharmacy benefit managers and healthcare providers, failing their fiduciary duty to their employees. The lawsuit claims this mismanagement caused the workers to massively overpay out of pocket for their monthly premiums and for necessary life-saving medications, while the corporate entities involved profited from the opaque pricing structures.
This feels like a massive David and Goliath story regarding the reality of healthcare costs in the U.S. If this lawsuit actually succeeds against the single largest bank in the country, the precedent would be earth-shattering. It could force absolute mandated transparency and strict legal accountability in how mega corporations nationwide negotiate, select, and administer employee health benefits. It could fundamentally alter the economics of employer-sponsored healthcare.
It is definitely a legal battle that every major corporation's HR and legal department is watching with extreme anxiety.
And speaking of massive concentrations of financial power and Goliath-level influence, let's look at the sheer concentration of wealth in the political sphere. A combined investigative report from the New York Times and the Washington Post analyzed the donor data from the recent 2024 U.S. federal election cycle. The numbers they uncovered are stunning. Just 300 billionaires contributed a staggering 19% of all total campaign funds spent during the entire national election.
You really have to pause and let the gravity of that number sink in. 300 individuals, a group small enough to comfortably fit into a single movie theater, personally accounted for nearly 1/5 of the entire financial fuel of a massive national democratic election involving hundreds of millions of voters.
It's just a huge concentration of power.
It profoundly highlights the immense, highly concentrated financial power of the ultra-wealthy and raises deeply uncomfortable questions about how that sheer volume of capital directly shapes legislative policy debates, candidate viability, and ultimate electoral outcomes.
And there is an interesting operational paradox happening in Washington politics right now as well. The current Trump administration, which initially made massive headlines by aggressively slashing approximately 260,000 federal government jobs in a highly publicized effort to downsize the administrative state and cut costs, is now rapidly reversing course.
They are hiring again.
Right. They are currently ramping up massive federal hiring initiatives to try and replenish the workforce they just depleted.
It perfectly illustrates the stark, often jarring difference between the ideology of a political campaign and the grinding operational reality of actually running a massive, highly complex federal government apparatus. You can run a campaign promising to slash the bureaucracy, but eventually you discover that you actually need specialized personnel to process the veterans' benefits paperwork, run the environmental testing agencies, manage their air traffic controllers, and deliver the basic, fundamental services that the public expects from the state. You can't govern a complex nation with empty offices.
But while Washington deals with the logistics of domestic staffing, we have a report from Climate Change News about a literal life or death crisis unfolding in East Africa. An escalating, exceptionally severe drought in Kenya has left an estimated 3.3 million people facing acute, immediate hunger and potential starvation.
The scale of the humanitarian response required is massive. The costs are projected at over 30 billion Kenyan shillings just to provide emergency relief. However, the national government has currently only allocated about 6 billion shillings. They are facing a catastrophic multi-billion shilling funding gap.
But circling back to our very first discussion today about the power of technology, there is a major push by international organizations to invest heavily in community-level climate and disaster hubs in Kenya. The core idea is to utilize advanced AI-assisted climate modeling, similar to the complex data analysis used in those educational tools we discussed, to create hyperlocal, high-precision early warning systems for rural farmers and pastoralists.
And that technology could be completely transformative. If they can secure the international funding to deploy these AI models, it could provide vulnerable communities with the vital, precise weeks of advance notice they desperately need to strategically relocate their livestock herds, secure emergency water sources, and prepare for the worst.
Going from reactive to proactive.
Exactly. It's a clear example of how deploying predictive technology at the ground level could potentially save millions of lives, moving from a reactive model of famine relief to a proactive model of disaster mitigation.
It is truly incredible to see how the same underlying computational technology that helps a student visualize a geometry problem on a laptop can be deployed to predict a lethal famine in East Africa or to shoot down explosive drones in the Middle East. Okay, we've covered the expansion of the cosmos, the psychology of Mars missions, brutal wars, authoritarian banking tactics, and climate disasters. I promised you some comedic relief to end the show, and we're going to find it in the utterly insane, entirely detached economics of the National Football League.
I've been waiting for this.
We are pulling reports from NFL.com, the BBC, and NBC Sports. Free agency just officially opened, and the financial numbers being casually thrown around are mind-boggling. First up, the Miami Dolphins out in Florida, USA, are officially releasing their starting quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa. By cutting him from the roster, the team is willingly eating a dead cap hit of $99.2 million.
Huh? A $99.2 million dead cap hit. For the listeners who don't spend their weekends studying the highly arcane, complex accounting rules of the NFL salary cap, dead money means the team is taking a nearly $100 million financial penalty against their operational budget for a player who is literally no longer employed by them.
It's wild.
They are paying an astronomical premium for the explicit privilege of having him not play for their football team.
I'm just trying to imagine the HR meeting. I sincerely wish my boss would pay me $99 million to permanently not come into the office. It is just an unfathomable amount of money for a clerical transaction. And the spending spree doesn't stop there. To immediately replace the guy they just paid to leave, the Dolphins turned around and signed Malik Willis to a new 3-year contract worth $67.5 million.
It just keeps going.
Meanwhile, over in Indianapolis, Indiana, USA, the Colts just traded their star wide receiver Michael Pittman Jr. to the Pittsburgh Steelers over in Pennsylvania. And as part of the trade mechanics, he instantly signs a brand new 3-year deal with Pittsburgh worth $59 million.
It's the perfect, somewhat absurd illustration of how the economy of sports operates in a completely alternate, hermetically sealed universe compared to the everyday macroeconomic reality the rest of the world lives in. We spent this entire deep dive discussing regular people aggressively stressing about a 17% increase in the price of a gallon of gas at the pump, or worrying about the retirement margins, or skipping medical screenings due to cost.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, NFL general managers are casually shifting around $50, $60, $100 million in guaranteed contracts and imaginary dead cap space before they even eat lunch. It is a completely detached, highly lucrative financial ecosystem that seems entirely immune to global economic gravity.
It really is an alternate reality. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to pull all of these wildly diverse threads together for you.
If we look at the entire narrative journey of the news today, we started at the absolute unimaginable macro scale, discovering that the vast, empty cosmic voids of the universe are filled with quantum energy that is actively, aggressively pushing the very fabric of space apart.
Right.
And then we zoomed all the way in to the highly pressurized microscale of humanity, where global geopolitics, the vulnerability of oil choke points in the Middle East, and the rapid unchecked deployment of both military and educational technology are pulling us all into much tighter, much more volatile collisions. The physical universe is expanding infinitely outward, but our human world is rapidly shrinking, accelerating, and colliding.
That is such a profound way to look at it. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over based on everything we explored. Today, we talked extensively about advanced computational models and AI. We saw it being used to elegantly map out math concepts for young students. We saw it modeling climate droughts to save vulnerable lives in Kenya. And we saw it being deployed in the skies over the Middle East to violently shoot down explosive drones. As this specific technology accelerates at breakneck speed, entering every facet of our lives, are we designing tools that truly reflect our highest intelligence and capacity for empathy? Or are we simply building incredibly efficient, highly scalable mirrors that just amplify our deepest, most violent human conflicts? Think about that next time you casually ask a chatbot a question. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. As always, stay curious, keep looking closely at the news, and keep questioning the complex world around you. We'll see you next time.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to the debate. Today we are unpacking a substantial payload of global intelligence. We're looking at raw diplomatic cables, market analyses, and on-the-ground reporting that, frankly, most of the public never gets to see.
Yeah, the real behind-the-scenes data.
Exactly. Because you don't have direct access to these sources, we are going to break down the tectonic shifts happening right now across our planetary home. And our central question today is this: is the massive wave of geopolitical and economic instability we are experiencing, and I mean everything from severe oil shocks driven by Middle East conflicts to authoritarian resource grabs in Latin America, is this primarily a symptom of a collapsing, rules-based global order that is fracturing our world? Or does it represent a chaotic but fundamentally necessary structural transition toward a resilient, multipolar global system?
Right. It's a question of the decade.
It really is. My stance is that this instability vividly demonstrates the dangerous power vacuum created by the decline of a unified global order, which is paving the way for unrestrained warfare and severe economic fragility.
And my position is that these events, as turbulent as they certainly are, reflects a forced and systemic correction against an outdated unipolar system, meaning a world dictated by a single superpower, ultimately paving the way for alternative global alliances and vital economic adaptations.
So to really understand the gravity of the breakdown in global diplomacy right now, we just have to follow the immediate compounding harm rippling across the planet. We are witnessing the dangerous fragmentation of the international system, and the primary symptom is just a complete loss of stability. Let's start with the escalating conflict in the Middle East. Following the deaths of 7 U.S. soldiers in this specific theater and the appointment of hardliner Mujtaba Khamenei in Iran, global oil prices have spiked above $100 per barrel. And that isn't just a number on a terminal. It is profound economic damage, hitting citizens everywhere. I mean, in the United States, gasoline prices have surged 17% since this escalation started.
Right, hitting what, about $3.48 a gallon?
Exactly, an average of $3.48 a gallon, with massive economic hubs like California seeing prices well over $5. But it goes far beyond the gas pump. We are seeing the rapid normalization of unrestrained violence as a direct symptom of this collapse. Look at Haiti. We have the deployment of explosive drones in urban areas, resulting in over 1,200 civilian deaths in just the past year.
Yeah, it's horrific.
It is. And in Ecuador, we are seeing the political and financial persecution of environmental defenders, just to prioritize aggressive mining operations. This is the reality of a vacuum. When a unified, rules-based order erodes, sheer force dictates reality.
Well, the economic and human friction is real. I am not denying that. But to label it as a collapse completely misreads what is actually happening. The world is actively resisting a unipolar hegemony, a system that has historically enforced its will primarily through military intervention and economic pressure. What you are calling a dangerous fragmentation is actually the friction of a multipolar world being born. The old system is just fighting to survive.
But that friction is...
Let me unpack the motivation behind that friction for a second. There's a statement in our source material from Abdul Majid Hakim Elahi, Iran's representative in India, and he articulated a view that is widely held across the global south. He argues the current conflict in the Middle East is fundamentally driven by a Western desire to maintain global dominance and prevent the rise of a multipolar world, a world anchored by deep civilizational ties between nations like Iran, Russia, China, and India. The instability isn't because the rules-based order is collapsing. The instability exists because the old guard is aggressively trying to stop these new alliances from forming.
Okay, but I want to focus on the tangible fallout of those shifting alliances, specifically regarding the sheer fragility of our global supply chain, because we cannot just dismiss the economic devastation as mere growing pains. The data regarding energy vulnerability is staggering right now. Vladimir Putin recently issued a stark warning about the Strait of Hormuz, noting an 80% decrease in traffic through that corridor.
Which is exactly why the transition away from fossil fuels is accelerating so rapidly.
Wait, let me finish the thought on the strait, because the scale is vital here. The Strait of Hormuz historically handles 1/3 of the world's seaborne oil exports. It is a primary artery for the planet. The entire globalization of trade relies on the secure passage of these critical choke points. When a localized conflict threatens an artery of that magnitude, it doesn't just bump up gas prices. It drives up planetary inflation, threatens global industrial output, and risks a severe global recession. The geopolitical fractures are proving to be completely unsustainable.
Unsustainable for the old model, sure.
Unsustainable for currently functioning economies. Look at the cracks forming inside the European coalition. Hungary is currently begging the EU to lift the ban on Russian oil and gas just to keep its economy afloat. When the centralized security apparatus that kept those sea lanes open is challenged into paralysis, the resulting economic fracture is devastating for the average global citizen.
You are pointing to the pain of relying on an outdated, highly centralized fossil fuel economy as proof that we need to maintain the superpower hegemony that controls it. And honestly, that logic is entirely backward. The pain you are describing is exactly why we need to rip the Band-Aid off. These market shocks are the ultimate catalyst for global adaptation. The financial architecture is already shifting to accommodate this multipolar reality.
Shifting how? By making basic commodities completely unaffordable for regular people?
No, by building financial escape hatches. Look at the data on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. They recently altered their margins. For our listeners who don't follow commodity trading closely, altering a margin essentially means changing the down payment required to trade an asset.
Right.
So the CME raised margin requirements for oil, making it more expensive and difficult to gamble on. But they lowered the margins for gold and silver. They are actively creating financial pressure valves. This allows traders to hedge against the instability of the unipolar system by moving into precious metals completely outside the traditional petrodollar framework. The market itself is finding a new equilibrium.
The market might be finding an equilibrium for commodity traders in Chicago, but that doesn't shield the global population from the reality of energy shortages. You can't heat a home with a silver margin.
Actually, it is shielding them, provided their governments are adapting. The very vulnerability you highlighted in the Strait of Hormuz is accelerating green infrastructure worldwide. The DW report in our intelligence packet explicitly shows that nations heavily invested in renewables, specifically citing Denmark and Uruguay, are far better protected from these exact oil shocks.
Well, they have specific geographic...
Uruguay's energy grid is largely renewable now. Their economy is shielded precisely because they moved away from the unipolar fossil fuel-dependent model. The crisis proves that localized resilience through renewable energy is a much safer planetary model than relying on a single superpower to police a narrow strait in the Middle East.
The DW report might highlight Denmark and Uruguay doing well, but that is a luxury of geography, timing, and capital. Most of the world doesn't have that luxury. When the policing mechanism of a single superpower breaks down, the deterioration of diplomatic norms doesn't just end with high oil prices. It leads to military escalation and new alliances that carry an unbelievable human cost. We are seeing a catastrophic civilian toll that this emerging multipolar world is utterly failing to prevent.
The civilian toll is an absolute tragedy. I completely agree. But attributing it to the collapse of a rules-based order assumes that that order was previously keeping people safe.
It provided a framework for accountability that is now rapidly vanishing. I mean, in a single day, Israeli strikes displaced 100,000 people in southern Beirut. Even more horrifying, an Iranian elementary school was just bombed using a Tomahawk missile, killing over 160 children. When the centralized pressure for diplomatic norms evaporates, the battlefield globalizes in a way that bypasses all traditional diplomatic channels. We are turning the entire planet into a crossfire zone. We even have reports now of Ukraine supplying AI-powered anti-drone systems to U.S. bases in the Middle East. It's a borderless war.
Let's look closely at the weapons involved in those tragedies, though. You mentioned an Iranian school was hit by a Tomahawk missile. Who manufactures and supplies Tomahawk missiles?
Well, it's a U.S. weapon, yes.
Exactly. That is a Western munition. The horrific civilian casualties we're seeing aren't the result of multipolarity. They're the violent death throes of a colonial-era approach to diplomacy. The violence stems directly from the old hegemonic powers refusing to cede influence and heavily arming their proxies to maintain a foothold.
What the response from international leadership isn't to de-escalate or build this resilient new system you were talking about. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is utilizing this exact conflict to push for a highly militarized European security doctrine, while simultaneously refusing to condemn the strikes in Beirut. That is a clear sign of a world arming itself for wider, unrestrained conflict, not a peaceful transition.
Of course, von der Leyen is pushing for a militarized fortress mentality. The old guard is terrified because the rest of the world is rapidly diversifying its power centers. We are seeing unprecedented diplomatic pushback from non-Western nations. Right now, there is an international delegation composed of global political figures traveling to Cuba and Venezuela in explicit solidarity against U.S. aggressions and sanctions. They are actively building coalitions entirely outside traditional Western frameworks. And returning to Elahi's point, in India, Iran has repeatedly stated its nuclear facilities are open to international inspection. Much of the globe views this current war not as a failure of multipolarity, but as a desperate militarized vendetta by Western leaders to disrupt independent emerging ties between nations like India and Iran.
You are painting this transition as a victory for resilience and civilizational ties. But the reality on the ground is far darker. If we transition our focus to Latin America, we can see exactly what this multipolar world looks like in practice. It isn't lofty diplomatic coalitions. It is a desperate, violent business grab for resources and political control. We are seeing a massive rise in domestic authoritarianism because the international guardrails are gone.
Domestic authoritarianism is hardly a new phenomenon, nor is it unique to a multipolar system.
But it is the method and the impunity that have changed. Let's talk about Andres Tapia in Ecuador. He is an indigenous Quechua environmental defender fighting against aggressive mining operations. President Daniel Noboa isn't just sending in police. He is utilizing state power to completely freeze the Banco Pinchat accounts of Tapia and other activists. Why? To forcibly push through the extraction of critical minerals. When you can financially paralyze dissent, you allow local strongmen to act with total impunity to feed the global market's demand for resources.
But who is demanding those critical minerals?
Diverting public welfare funds to physically and digitally repress their exiled opposition. They are essentially creating a stateless class of dissidents. When the unified global order that once enforced basic human rights norms erodes, authoritarian leaders exploit that vacuum. Even international law becomes a toothless suggestion. We see this clearly in the ongoing ICC case against former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte regarding his brutal drug war. The ICC is attempting to evaluate the case, but domestic accountability remains entirely non-existent. The mechanism for global justice is broken.
Situation in Ecuador as a failure of a multipolar world. In reality, it is a direct symptom of the intense global economic pressures exported by the unipolar system, specifically the frantic rush for critical minerals to fuel a corporate-driven green energy transition in the West.
The demand might be global, but the authoritarian execution is local, and it's enabled by a lack of international oversight.
The execution is enabled by Western financial architecture. The financial repression of activists in Ecuador is incredibly telling here. Banco Pichincha and the Ecuadorian government aren't just arbitrarily freezing accounts. They are doing it under the guise of international anti-terrorism regulations. That is the weaponization of global financial compliance, a system built, designed, and enforced by Western hegemony. They are using the old world's rules to crush local dissent for the new world's minerals.
That still leaves us with a fractured system where vulnerable populations are crushed by state power, regardless of whose rules they are twisting.
If we want to talk about vulnerable populations being crushed and the erosion of accountability, we must look at the privatization of warfare happening right now in the Caribbean. You brought up the 1,200 civilian deaths from explosive drones in Haiti earlier, but who is operating those drones? It isn't just local gangs. Private military contractors like Vectis Global are operating explosive drones in densely populated urban areas. Whether it is the U.S. military projecting power in the Middle East with Tomahawk missiles or private Western contractors operating drones in Haiti, the root issue is the aggressive militarized extraction and security model exported by the West. The multipolar world isn't creating this authoritarianism. It is actively trying to dismantle the economic structures that make such exploitation profitable in the first place.
So, to summarize my stance on the intelligence we've broken down today, the data paints a stark, unforgiving picture of a planetary system losing its structural integrity. The current geopolitical and economic landscape is entirely perilous. We are dealing with severe oil shocks stemming from the Middle East that threaten global industrial output. We see the rapid militarization of the European Union in response to borderless conflicts. And we are witnessing blatant authoritarian resource grabs stretching from the indigenous territories of Ecuador to the drone-patrolled skies of Haiti. These are not the growing pains of a better, diversified system. They are the explicit, violent demonstrations of a fractured global order that now lacks the centralized diplomatic guardrails necessary to protect human rights, secure supply chains, and prevent unrestrained military escalation.
And to summarize my perspective, the turbulence we are witnessing across global markets and diplomacy is undeniably painful, but it is the necessary friction of a world in profound transition. We are moving away from an outdated unipolar hegemony, a system that relied heavily on fossil fuel dependency, financial weaponization, and military intervention to maintain its control. What we are moving toward is a multipolar system where resilience is built from the ground up. We see the evidence in the formation of new civilizational alliances across the global south,
the financial adaptation in global commodities markets like the CME, and the successful push for renewable energy independence in nations like Uruguay and Denmark. The old system is fighting back aggressively, which causes the chaos you describe, but the structural correction toward a diversified, resilient planetary ecosystem is well underway.
It is clear that we have a strong point of convergence today. We both fully acknowledge that this current transitional period is causing immense human and economic friction. The civilian populations caught in the crossfire of AI drones and Tomahawk strikes, the families navigating the crushing weight of 17% spikes in energy costs, and the activists facing sudden financial sanctions under the guise of anti-terrorism laws. They are all bearing the brutal cost of this geopolitical shift.
Absolutely. The human toll is undeniable and severe across the globe. Where we continue to fundamentally disagree is on the trajectory of this shift. You see the end result as a permanently fractured, warring planet left in a dangerous vacuum, whereas I see the ultimate destination as a more stable, diversified, and resilient global ecosystem that has finally shaken off a unipolar monopoly.
This discussion highlights the deep value of rigorously analyzing these diverse global sources. To truly understand the interconnectedness of our planetary home, we must look beyond isolated events and see the macro trends shaping our future. There are many more layers to explore in this material regarding how these massive shifts in finance, energy, and diplomacy will impact daily life across the globe. But as always, we leave the final judgment to you, the listener. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.